mean, you describe Moonbeam obviously as a layer 1. Does that mean that Polkadot's a layer 0?
Kind of have these layer 1s and then there's something underneath it. The user's not like aware of this. They just get the dot deposit address, they put it in.
Oh my gosh, if they were.
And previously there was this nail biter of a decision up front, like which chain should I deploy to? Do I want to be a big fish in a little pond, little fish, big pond, which, if I get this wrong, I'm screwed.
Crypto vernacular is so incredibly confusing.
I mean, adoption is adoption, right?
Awesome. In the crypto space, we often talk about layer 1s and layer 2s, but what about layer 3s, 4s, 5s, and even layer 0s like Polkadot? Derek Yoo is the founder of Purestake, who's built Moonbeam and Moonriver. We talk about why interoperability is so important and the way that we're currently doing it doesn't work.
Let's go.
Yeah, Purestake, Moonbeam, Moonriver, you're building a lot of things.
Yeah, that was...
Give us the very quick and dirty on everything that you're building and why you're doing it.
Well, just to introduce myself, I'm Derek, the CEO of Purestake, but yeah, we're known for being the primary developers of the Moonbeam and Moonriver networks. So what is Moonbeam? Moonbeam is an L1 smart contract platform that is optimized for cross-chain use cases. And so that's what we're really trying to focus on servicing, this new emerging, kind of cross-chain set of scenarios is the thing that we're focused on. And part of that, part of how we're able to do that is because we're a parachain on Polkadot, so that means that we have access to some special cross-chain functionality. As
Talk about why you chose to build on Polkadot.
Yeah, I think it was clear from the beginning that we needed a chain, basically, that was going to be needed. And so as soon as you reach that conclusion, there's really only a couple options that make sense these days. So that's either using Substrate, which is the development framework that you use to build chains in the Polkadot ecosystem, or Cosmos SDK is what you'd use to build a Cosmos-based chain. These frameworks are things that make the development of a chain a lot easier, right? I mean, it dramatically reduces the amount of effort you need to put in to create your own blockchain. And so that was the first, I think, choice. And for us, Substrate and Polkadot made a lot of sense. We had a team that already had some familiarity with Rust as a programming language, so that was a better fit. And actually, Polkadot has a bit more. It has a little bit of a different structure than Cosmos, which we felt would be good for the kinds of cross-chain scenarios we're trying to support on Moonbeam.
But I have to imagine that your base premise, first principles, was that everything is going to be interoperable and we're going to live in a multi-chain world, and that we're not going to live in a world where one chain dominates.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if I go back to the mindset that led us to the Moonbeam idea in the first place, definitely that was a premise, is there's going to be many blockchains. And even when you accept that, you realize that this ability for the blockchains to communicate with each other or to connect to each other becomes this kind of critical capability, right? And so that was also like a key thing that we were looking for. Even back a couple of years, it's like, well, who is it that has some point of view or some take on how this cross-chain communication is going to work? And that's where the Polkadot system itself. I would call it one of the key features that it has is this built-in networking capability, if you want to call it that allows blockchains to talk to each other. It's called XCM.
Right. If you've been following me for the last few months, then you definitely know that I've been trading and investing on BITGET. Now listen, it took me 6 months to decide that they were going to be the sponsor for the newsletter. But once I saw their partnership with Juventus, that they were the world's leading copy trading platform in crypto, and also that they're a top 5 exchange by volume, well, I was sold and I was convinced. And I've been using it ever since to dollar cost average and to invest in Bitcoin. You can also trade there with leverage, but of course, be careful if you're going to do that. And I don't know if you saw the recent news, but they've also done a deal with Lionel Messi.
BITGET, a perfect.
Now, you can get up to an $8,000 bonus using my link below, and you can trade spot with absolutely no fees. You also get a 15% discount on trading leverage. Go ahead and sign up right now using the wolfofallstreets.info/BitGet. Claim that huge reward and use the world's best trading platform. I mean, you describe Moonbeam obviously as a layer 1. Does that mean that Polkadot's a layer 0?
That's the terminology they use. It is kind of the terminology they use because you kind of have these layer 1s and then there's something underneath it. So I guess you have to subtract 1 and go to 0. But I think people are using that branding. And there's a project called Layer 0, right? That's
right.
thinking about the same ideas, although there are arguably smart contracts on top of layer one. So it gets a little confusing, but yeah, I think that's the idea is.
Crypto vernacular is so incredibly confusing, I think, even for the people who are deeply in it. But obviously, if we start from the idea of interoperability, that's going to be important. I think it's important to also take a look at what interoperability looks like now, and I would say that it's not there yet. At least, and in fact, I think you could argue that a lot of the exploits and problems that we've had have been because of their attempts to make chains interoperable. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's fair, but I would say that this kind of idea that the cross-blockchain interoperability is a key capability. The demand is there. The users want to use this. It's just that there's security issues that need to be dealt with. And but I would say that in that kind of intervening 2+ years since we started the project, obviously a lot of other things have happened. So the rise of bridges, there's a lot of new interoperability protocols these days. I mentioned one, layer 0. We just had an announcement with Wormhole today, actually. Axelar. There's a number of other protocols that are attacking the same problem of, hey, how do we network these blockchains together? Yeah, I think a lot of this actually happened this year. So these are all pretty new things. So there's these new kind of tools that developers have in their toolkit.
So what's unique to what you're building versus all of these other attempts?
Yeah, I see it as that on Moonbeam, we're looking to support as many of these cross-chain interoperability protocols as possible. We're in a moment right now where it's, there's definitely not clear if there's going to be kind of consolidation to, some handful, what that will be. And so what we're seeing is that it's really developer-led, where the developers are often choosing, hey, I'm going to work with layer 0, or I'm going to work with, they're choosing what they want to work with. And so, for us, we just need to support as many of them as possible. And we're seeing, definitely a different, of these protocols getting adoption from different development teams. But there are patterns that are starting to emerge that are pretty interesting. I would say what's become clear, so if I back up for a second, we have this concept called connected contracts. And so the idea is a smart contract on Moonbeam can work with service users, work with assets, access functionality on any blockchain regardless of where it is. And it's using this cross-chain messaging under the hood to connect the smart contracts in Moonbeam to other destinations. And so what we're seeing happen now is people are starting to use this functionality to create apps that span multiple blockchains. And the thing that's probably most interesting for me is there's two kind of key benefits I see coming out of a lot of the experiments and other protocols that are under development. One is that people are creating protocols that are more efficient than their unnetworked counterparts, and we can go into an example of that. And then the second thing is around the user experience. So I think that people are using these techniques to create apps that have better and less complicated user experiences than what was previously possible.
I'd love for you to expand on both of those things.
Yeah,
you
sure.
said you had an example of the first.
Sure. So an example. So I actually just met yesterday with Colton from Prime Protocol. So Prime Protocol is, think of a Maker style over collateralized stablecoin. So you put collateral assets in, you can mint stablecoins out. But the architecture is different. So the traditional way of being a multi-chain deployment of that would be that you'd have separate instances of that on many chains.
Yeah.
And so what he's done instead is I call it kind of a hub and spoke model, where there's a master set of contracts on Moonbeam, and then there's a remote kind of branch office set of contracts on a bunch of other chains, so Avalanche, Polygon, ETH mainnet, and so on. And so then the idea is, let's say that you would deposit AVAX into the local branch on Avalanche. Then a message gets sent back to the center on Moonbeam saying, "Hey, Scott just deposited this much AVAX on Avalanche." The asset doesn't move. There's no bridging. There's just this information that's coming back to the center. And so then the central set of contracts on Moonbeam have visibility into the state across all the chains. So then if you go to mainnet, you could say, "Okay, now I want to mint stablecoins," and it says, "Oh, okay, look, Scott has this balance available from deposits that happen on Avalanche, so let's allow for minting of stablecoins on mainnet." And so I think the interesting thing here is that you see it's if you compare against having separate installations everywhere, you get this effect where you can leverage any of the deposits on any chain, on any other chain. So I think it's gonna be a more efficient protocol, right?
Yeah, it also seemingly eliminates you actually moving the asset from one chain to another,
and you don't move assets. You don't move assets, exactly.
I mean, doesn't that effectively solve the exploit and hack problems?
I think it reduces the the problem with the bridges is it becomes this huge honeypot, because then there's all these assets getting locked up. So yeah, I think it does address or get at that problem as well. So yeah, I think that's in DeFi in particular, I think DeFi is leading on a lot of these things, but I expect there to be you can just take any existing idea and say, hey, I'm going to make the new cross-chain networked version of it. And I think there's going to be a lot of benefit, kind of protocol efficiency to be gained by doing that.
So it sounds like all these protocols you see as not competitors, but as potential partners.
For other chains, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and this is a kind of a mindset difference, I'd say, that that we definitely take as part of optimizing for these cross-chain use cases. I think a lot of other L1s see it as this zero-sum game where they're like, I want to just fill my block space. I don't want to work with anyone else. But these use cases are naturally like cross-cutting. So we're saying no. Like we want to support like these messaging integrations with as many other chains as possible. And I think the developers want that too, right? Because they, what I've seen on the developer side is that previously there was this nail biter of a decision up front, like which chain should I deploy to? Do I want to be a big fish in a little pond, little fish, big pond? Which, if I get this wrong, I'm screwed. So I think now with this approach, you can kind of deploy in one place, but then organically expand to like other chains.
You're also hedging your bet.
Yeah, so I think.
I mean, if you choose a chain and that layer one ends up being exploited and useless, you've wasted years of development, right? So
that's right,
now
that's
if
right.
you have access to all of them, you don't
right.
have to worry about making the wrong choice.
I think it's quite helpful and de-risks like the situation for developers for sure. And I want to get back to the second. I mentioned the second kind of driver is around the user experience. So the example I just while I was been here at Mainnet, we recorded this video with Osmosis with Axelar. So we did kind of a three-way integration with those two teams. So let me explain how that went. So Osmosis, for those of you who don't know, is an app chain DEX on Cosmos. Sunny really values the user experience. He wants to create the best possible user experience by being an app chain. And so what he wanted to do was to do one-click dot deposits. So it's on Cosmos, but if you want to deposit dot into one of the pools he has, just make that very simple. Present the user with a dot deposit address, a native dot deposit address. And so here's what happens behind the scenes. So the user gets this dot deposit address. If they transfer dot to that address, there's like a whole series of events that get kicked off. So the dot goes from the Polkadot relay chain where dot lives natively. It gets transferred via XCM to Moonbeam, so we call that XC.dot when it's on Moonbeam. Then it gets forwarded to Axelar, so it's routed from Moonbeam across to the Cosmos interchain ecosystem. Then IBC is used to move it to Osmosis, and then there's an LP action on the Osmosis side to LP it in. And so I like this example because it shows that the user's not aware of this. They just get the dot deposit address. They put it in.
Oh my gosh, if they were.
I mean, if you did all those steps, it's like a 50-step process, very complicated. But I see this as a key thing where this is like Web 2, where you start hiding away some of the infrastructural complexity away from the user. The user expresses what they want to do, and sure, maybe there's a bunch of chains needed to fulfill that request. But the user doesn't have to be interacting with each one. And you're using this is enabled by cross-chain messaging.
I would argue that what you just described is the single biggest obstacle to mainstream adoption for crypto in general.
Yeah.
Is that it's just not easy to use for your average person.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I see this cross-chain messaging enables this hiding of complexity, which I think is going to be an important driver.
Do you think then that we get to the point with DeFi and these protocols where it's like your cell phone? I make a call, I don't really worry about it. I don't worry about voice over IP when I'm using Zoom, and I don't worry about how the internet works. I just do it.
I think so. I mean, I think so. I mean, obviously there's unique things about crypto where they're not your keys, not your coin. I mean, there's certain things that are probably a bit unique and will always need some level of user interaction that might be different than a Web 2 application. But I mean, adoption is adoption, right? And so I think that this is the story I tell people. I came from this Web 2 background building cloud products. And so, and that's a bit unusual sometimes. I think a lot of Web3 founders are, the first-time founders.
Yeah.
And so when I explain to people, look, the products, the mobile and other products that we built in this Web2 company, a third of the product staff was UX, people. It's either designers, people doing research, and that kind of blows people's minds. But no, that's what people do, and when they're making Web2 products that are going to be easy to use, is you put a lot of energy into the user experience.
So what are the most exciting things that are being built on Moonbeam?
Yeah, I mean, it is around these cross-chain connected use cases. I'd say that a lot of adoption is happening in DeFi. I think that a lot of those teams are kind of the most aggressive to adopt, and also for looking for competitive advantage, right, relative to other protocols. So we're definitely seeing a bunch of those in the lending borrowing space and different areas of DeFi. But I would say we are seeing games too. So the gaming use case could be like there's a project I just met with that they have a racing game, and the idea is that like there is like this kind of master kind of deployment on Moonbeam, but then they have like racetracks on a bunch of the other chains. And so each of the races happening on those other chains can be kind of an event in its own right. You can have, that kind of provides value both to the chain and the users there. But then there's this aggregation of all the race results coming back to like the master chain, right? Where you can have, let's say a season or like a competition kind of thing. And so I think that's pretty cool, right? It's again back to this idea of organically expanding like different chains, but having it all be part of like the same system.
I love the idea of GameFi and play to earn gaming, of course, and everything, but it seems like none of the games are anywhere close to the quality of what's coming out of, Hollywood level studios for gaming. It just feels very early to me for gaming. I mean, do you agree, or do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think back on some of the same comments I was making, where I think to make a great game is like, that's not just, hey, I'm going to try making. I mean, that's you need serious people. It's like it takes probably a couple failures first before you learn how to make a good one. Yeah, and I think obviously you have to adapt yourself to Web3 in the sense that blockchains are slow, and so there's like certain like trade-offs that need to be made. Yeah.
Well, we've obviously had sort of a DeFi summer, NFT summer, a metaverse fall. Will all of those sort of categories of crypto be built on Moonbeam, or do you think there are more specific use cases that you're better tooled for?
Where I see Moonbeam going is I mentioned around these like cross-chain applications, but what we see is I can see Moonbeam being a hub of cross-chain messaging activity. Ultimately, I mean that's really where the value is that we're providing, and so as these techniques I've been describing get adopted, Moonbeam is kind of strategically positioned to be let's call it this like central like routing point like for all of these different cross-chain messages. We have unique access into the Polkadot ecosystem. That's one thing, but we're starting to see other things that there may be scenarios that cut across multiple messaging systems, and then so you need an ability to kind of route between these different messaging systems. Developers want to use more than one, right? They might want to have redundancy in their system. So these are the kinds of scenarios that we're thinking about, and even baking in features then into the L1 itself to help make it a better like deployment destination for these cross-chain use cases.
Are there ideas or concepts being built either on Moonbeam or just in general beyond sort of the obvious categories I've talked about that are really exciting you for the future? Some use cases of crypto that maybe we're not even thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, the technique is this cross-chain, but like obviously the use case can leverage like that capability to kind of make a better version like than you were able to do with just a single chain environment. I think what I see is that my vision is a bit that Moonbeam could be something like an AWS, right? So it's basically instead of having these like single bespoke chains, like you used to have like single computers that people kind of care and fed and do these things, moving more to a model where it's on demand, right? So you might have the ability to get like block space on demand. And I think developers are going to care less in the future about where that comes from, and they just need it to be decentralized, secure, and then have it be available like when they need it. And so that's kind of the vision we're marching to, is having different kinds of specialized chains, using Moonbeam as a way to kind of connect them together, and then provide that to developers so they can leverage these specialized chains to build apps that can scale more than when they're just running on a single chain.
Talk about being decentralized and secure. It's something that comes up all the time now, but didn't seem to be a huge narrative. You mentioned AWS. How is anything decentralized if it's all being built on centralized cloud services?
Well, that's obviously a lot of the nodes get run on the cloud, so that's definitely a thing. But this decentralized AWS vision I have, like it would be AWS like in the sense that there's different developer services, but it would all be like Web3 based services. So if you wanted to build a decentralized application, you might say, oh, I need compute, I need like storage, I need like an ability to store my user accounts, and you'd use those specialized blockchains to build like the application.
So we could eliminate AWS from it entirely.
Yeah, I think that there's still probably
not now, but
yeah, I think if you wanted to build a Web3 application, I think that you'd use these services in the same way where they're kind of easy to consume as a developer.
And you talked about the fact that that's what you were somewhat doing before this. Could you talk about your background and how you landed here?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was building a Web2 traditional, and I've actually been building software my whole career, but I did spend quite a bit of time building up a cloud communications company in the Web2 space. The way I got into crypto is that my co-founder from that effort, left and started a crypto project. So that's a guy named Steve Kokinos. He's a left to start the project Algorand.
Of course.
So yeah, it was through then discussions with him that I got quite interested in crypto as well.
Is Web 3 an evolution of Web 2, or is it a parallel rail?
I see it as parallel. I mean, Web 2 is not going away, right? It still serves a useful function, but I see it as parallel, and there'll probably be increasing, kind of incorporation of concepts from each other, I think into applications.
Are there things that exist on Web 2 that cannot be improved in Web 3?
What would I say there? I mean, I think there is. I mean, there are certain things that Web 3 is like not well designed for, right? And given just the speed of blockchains and other things, and this, there is this tension point we talked about around UX and around, users being able to hold their keys. But on the other hand, there's properties that Web 3 has obviously that can't be serviced well by Web 2, like censorship resistance and some of the things you were just talking about with AWS, right? It's
Are we going to get solutions that simplify that private key process that you just hinted at? Because yet again, I think as much as we talk about people being their own bank, that means most people are going to fail at being their own bank, or they're going to be too scared to even try.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of, and frankly, that's not an area that I'm an expert in, but there is obviously already a lot of thought that's gone into different kinds of solutions that make end user key management easier. But yeah, I do see that as one of the key UX challenges, right? I mean, if you want mass adoption, you really have to make it both easy and at the same time, hard to lose your funds. So it is a difficult problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything, if we want true mainstream adoption, billions of people, has to be as easy as logging into your Facebook or doing a transaction on PayPal, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Can that happen?
I think it can happen, but some of these problems, they take a while to crack. It's not just hey, we solved it, right? I mean, if you look at regular computing, I mean, just to get to mobile UX where it is now, that took 30 years or something, right? So it just takes a while.
And your iPhone updates every 3 days, it feels like, just to continue to make those improvements.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's continuous.
So a lot of people, I think, in crypto want the final iteration now. I think that there's it keeps coming up every time we have a conversation, the idea of moving fast and breaking things. But when I think you're talking about people's money, maybe this is a longer timeline than they would expect.
I think it's just people have to realize that right now we're in an era where we're moving from shared blockchains to you can build your own. I mean, that's Moonbeam is part of that wave of using these new frameworks to build your own. But also they're just becoming networked. So it's back to when computers were first accessing the internet. That's the kind of era we're in. And you just think about all the the cloud, there's all these things that developed once those things were available. And so we're just at the beginning of that now in Web3.
5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I think 10, I'd say. It's there's probably a lot of specialization and development that's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
And so then in 10 years, we have a Web 2 UX UI equivalent, and people
maybe not,
but people are generally just using it. They don't know that blockchain is the underlying technology. You don't need to use terms like bridging and NFTs, and
I think so. Yeah.
It's just absolutely existing. Well,
I think so.
I look forward to that future. So thank you so much for helping build it.
Yeah.